I don't think anybody can really prepare you for combat as far as talking to you or trying to counsel you about it, but once you get there and you feel war, you feel what war is all about, and you actually see some equipment that people were out there trying to kill you with, then that gives you a feeling of, I don't know, it's an eerie feeling to pass equipment by that people just hours before were occupying and had the intent to destroy you, your equipment, and what you stood for. I think that brought the war really home, which was, wow, just a few hours ago, those guys were here, and now we're here. And I don't think anything will really prepare you for it. You just gotta experience it. Experience it.
Hello and welcome to Desert Storm Remembered. I'm Specialist John Hansen. During this program, we'll hear from the heroes, just a small cross-section of the soldiers, wives, husbands, and volunteers that made such a huge success of our operations in the Persian Gulf. But first, the folks from 7th Corps Public Affairs give us a look back at the war that will forever be known as Operation Desert Storm.
We got the call to duty on the 8th of November, late in the evening. There were only a few people in the Corps who knew about it at the time. And the Corps responded magnificently. We were proud to get the call that we were fit and prepared, ready, and proud to come and join our fellow soldiers who had been down here in Operation Desert Shield for about 3 months, 3+ months at that time. It was a series of rapid actions, most of them concurrent. The immediate actions were, of course, to alert all the units, to gather together the leadership of the Corps 2 days later and come down here to do, first of all, a leader's reconnaissance, to come take a look at the terrain, possibly get the initial mission guidance, which we got, to talk to some of our fellow soldiers and commanders who had been here, so we could apply their lessons learned very quickly in our own deployment and in our own reception and onward movement down here in Saudi Arabia. That worked very well for us.
Before this 7th Corps hardware began arriving in Saudi Arabia, it had already traveled overland through Europe in an operation requiring 119 truck convoys, 465 rail cars, and more than 300 river barges to reach European ports. From there, an armada of 109 ships set sail for the Arabian Gulf ports of Jubail and Dammam, the sea lift of the 7th Corps war machine. 38,600 end items ranging from high-mobility utility vehicles and armored personnel carriers to M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, M1A1 Abrams tanks, and the most lethal combination of Army aircraft ever assembled: Apaches, Cobras, Kiowas, Mohawks, Iroquois, and Blackhawks. Aerial deployment of 7th Corps forces into Saudi Arabia required 435 flights from Europe, with Military Airlift Command and chartered aircraft flying 72,000 Germany-based U.S. soldiers. Nearly 24,000 British troops were also deployed from bases throughout the United Kingdom, and from the continental United States, 143 aircraft and 31 ships brought 49,000 soldiers from the 1st Infantry and 1st Cavalry Divisions, as well as the total force soldiers of the National Guard and Army Reserves, mobilized in the largest call-up of reservists since the Korean War.
In this theater, we were a Corps Support Command of a little over 24,000. Most of the increase in that came from the reserve components in the National Guard. And I couldn't have been more pleased with the rapid formation of a team of active reserve and National Guard units. We also had an artillery brigade out of the reserve component who at one point in the battle was was reinforcing the fires of the 1st UK Division. The leadership and the soldiers of our British friends in the 1st UK Division spoke in great praise about the 142nd Artillery Brigade.
Our mission was to deploy this brigade, which was brought together in the November time frame, prepare them for deployment to Southwest Asia, deploy them, and to come out and support 7th Corps Artillery by providing fire support to the Corps.
The air and sea lift completed, 7th Corps now had an in-theater strength of 146,300 soldiers, preparing to move online with the coalition of forces committed to the liberation of Kuwait.
We made some initial coordination with Egyptian forces and later Syrian forces, of course, with our Saudi hosts. And so that type of coordination was continuous and ongoing and worked very well. We were side by side with Egyptian forces. At one point, the 1st Cavalry Division and the Egyptian forces on their flank were co-located at a very, very key coordinating point in actions that took place before we crossed the line of departure. So General Schwarzkopf's plan and scheme to merge this air, land, sea campaign together with coalition forces, I think went very well, and we were comfortable working with all the coalition forces here, to include our British friends who were under the tactical control of 7th Corps, and our French allies as well.
Moving northwest from the ports on a narrow 2-lane highway known as Tapline Road, 7th Corps units began rolling into their tactical assembly areas. There, soldiers were afforded the opportunity to sharpen combat skills and prepare unit and personal equipment for the mission ahead. A priority was the performance of preventive maintenance, particularly on the armored vehicles that would carry the ground war to the enemy.
To me, the first element in caring for soldiers is to ensure that they're prepared for their wartime mission. The results out here in the battle, I think, is a great validation for the tough and realistic training program in the United States Army. In discussions after the battle with our soldiers, to a soldier, they told me that their training had prepared them very well for the combat that they faced. When I asked them about future training, what they told me was the harder and tougher and longer the training, the better. Our leadership were also unanimous in their praise of CMTC at Hohenfels, National Training Center, the Battle Command Training Program for our senior leadership, in preparing them to be able to focus combat power and to get our soldiers to the right place at the right time in the right combination, and then our great soldiers would take it from there.
January 17, 1991, coalition air forces launched the air offensive, taking the war deep into Iraq and Kuwait, preparing the battlefield for the ground offensive that was to come. Now codenamed Operation Desert Storm, it was the beginning of the end for the Iraqi forces supporting the occupation of Kuwait.
Well, this truly was an air-land battle. Our great friends in the Air Force, their magnificent air campaign was a great contributor to preparing the battlefield for us tactically and operationally for the ground campaign that came a little while, obviously, after the air campaign started. So I was great admiration of the skill and the bravery that the air forces of the coalition took the fight to the enemy, both strategically and tactically. And as we saw the results of that campaign during our own ground operation, obviously was, I think I was even more impressed when I was able to come out here on the ground and take a look at it. Secondly, during the actual conduct of the ground offensive, again, it was an air-land operation. We had continuous support from the air, both close air support and interdiction support, and we think able to put that to great use. And all of our commanders were unanimous to include our soldiers in their praise of the responsiveness of the air to the ground battle.
Throughout the area of operation, Hawk and Patriot batteries kept up the air defense umbrella against the threat of Iraqi aircraft and Scud missiles launched into Saudi Arabia. The closest call came when a Scud fell on the town of Hafr al-Batn, 17 kilometers west of the Corps rear, inflicting damage to several homes and businesses.
We're now called the Scud Busters. That's based off the fact that Iraq keeps launching Scuds and we keep busting them. And people on AFN and everywhere we go, we're getting a lot of support for Patriot because now the soldiers have one less worry because they know that air defense is there to give them the air coverage. And overall, once again, it goes back to them being able to provide their job and perform their mission. And they don't have to look over their shoulder or look up in the sky because if it flies, it dies.
Then in mid-February, as the air war raged over Iraq and Kuwait, 7th Corps divisions began a massive shift to the west into forward assembly areas, a key element of a well-laid deception plan orchestrated to ensure maximum surprise.
The Fighting Sixth was chosen way back in January to lead the first 7 Corps Apache raid into Iraq. That finally came to be at 0100 hours on the 16th of February. It was the first squadron level Apache raid for this Gulf crisis. It was conducted under a total zero illumination night, and we were picked to do that because of our extensive night flying experience back in Germany and our training out here in the desert. As we rolled onto those targets, the enemy was totally bewildered, could not see us. You could see them in total confusion running around, trying to figure out where we were, what was happening to them as missiles were falling on their equipment. If the enemy was not taking action against us, we allowed them to escape. If they were taking action against us, we destroyed them and their equipment. All equipment in the battle area was destroyed, and the BDA turned out to be quite much larger than we first expected by reviewing the tapes. Our rockets had destroyed numerous infantry fighting positions and probably numerous infantry in that area that had been there as a strong position.
And the logisticians of 7th Corps worked continuous shifts to sustain the soldiers who would prosecute the battle, each day pushing forward 1.5 million meals, 5.6 million gallons of fuel, nearly 3.5 million gallons of water, and more than 6,000 tons of ammunition. At 1500 hours on the 24th day of February, moving behind a rain of steel, Desert Storm rolled across the Saudi Arabian border into Iraq. The liberation of Kuwait had entered its final phase. The 1st Cavalry Division into the rookie pocket. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment engaging at 73 Easting. The Big Red 1 into the breach at Al Muthanna, then on to Objective Norfolk and the interdiction of Highway 8. The 1st Armor at Objective Bonn and Al Busaya. The deep attack of the 11th Aviation Brigade at Objective Minden. The British 1st Armor at Objective Waterloo, and the spearhead of the 3rd Armor Division at Phase Line Bullet. Battle after battle, 7th Corps was the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. hours of intense armored combat later, 7th Corps forces had pushed 260 kilometers through Iraq into Kuwait. In total disarray, the Iraqi army was rapidly retreating to the north. 40 of its 42 divisions destroyed. Thousands of its soldiers dead or taken prisoner. Battlefields littered with the refuse of conflict. The price paid for Saddam Hussein's defiance of the United Nations mandate to withdraw from Kuwait. Superior command and control and battlefield preparation were among reasons listed by 7th Corps soldiers for low Allied losses.
The main reason I think we won this as well as we did is not the equipment itself, but just the total combined arms, because they obviously don't have the artillery or the air support that we did, and the command and control procedure works a lot better in this army than it did with the Iraqis and with the Soviet equipment.
In answering the question, why did we have so few casualties, friendly casualties, I would say number one, because of our intelligence gathering effort from the day we hit the ground over here. Number two, because of our leadership and our control techniques of our forces. And number three, because of the preparation of the battlefield by the air forces and the indirect fire, artillery, and mortar guys.
And for those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country, there were tributes from comrades in arms, as memorial services were conducted throughout the Corps.
I consider it a privilege to have served at his side. I know my men feel the same way. I am sure that when my time comes, Cash, being the scout he is already at Fiddler's Green. I will hear a voice that says, "Don't worry, LT, the way is clear and there are no obstacles." That's the kind of man he was.
Sunday, March 3rd. In a tent erected on the edge of an airfield in Safwan, Iraq, leaders of the coalition forces meet for the first time with Iraqi military representatives to establish a permanent ceasefire. With General Franks, General Norman Schwarzkopf, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied effort, confronts the Iraqi leaders and leaves the table with an agreement to all coalition demands. The next mission for 7th Corps soldiers, providing humanitarian assistance to the citizens of Kuwait and Iraq.
With a lot of the ordnance that is littering the roadways and things, we had 4 children come in this morning with severe lacerations and various other major problems that were evac'd to a facility for hopefully getting some care. As I say, it's kind of a humanitarian project that we are trying to do. I'll be honest with you, it's kind of gut-wrenching, though, just seeing these children. But we'll do the best we can, with what we have.
That's when it really hits you. That's when you really realize what's going on. You see the people walking around, mothers and fathers pushing the little babies with no place to go. It really touches you then, lets you know what's going on. When you give them, once you give them some food and some water or something, it makes you feel real good. You feel like you've really done something. We come over here to help their country, and then you can help them out even more. It just makes it better.
And in keeping with a pledge made by grateful President Bush, a ceremony in Khobar, Saudi Arabia, on the morning of March 8th marked the first redeployment of 7th Corps soldiers back to their homes in Germany and the United States.
Over here the way a superb corps should move over here. 7th Corps deployed to the field the way a superb corps should deploy to the field. 7th Corps attacked the enemy the way a good corps should attack the enemy. And 7th Corps kicked the living daylights out of the enemy the way a good corps should kick the daylights out of an enemy. So it was a hell of a good job on the part of 7th Corps all the way around.
You go with my deepest admiration and thanks as your commander and as a fellow soldier. Our nation is grateful and thanks you. Our Army is grateful and thank you. And this Corps and each of your commanders and units are so very proud of your combat success and your great actions, and owes you everlasting thanks.
The devastation of war is something that will stick with me for a long time. It's unreal the amount of damage that the Air Force had done. At the same time, the armored forces, ground forces, the things that they were capable of doing will stick with me for a long time.
All the masses of destroyed equipment, I would say at least half of it, if not more, were a direct result of the air campaign.
Before the fighting started, it was generally thought that the success of the air war would determine the success of the ground war. And once Desert Storm began, it did not take long for our pilots to claim supremacy over the skies of Iraq. The Air Force European Broadcast Squadron filed this story in February.
American combat air patrols over Iraq are having great success dealing with the Iraqi air threat. This unit flies F-15 Eagles and reports outstanding success during its missions. During our visit, the pilot shot down 4 enemy aircraft for a total of 8 air-to-air kills. For security reasons, the names of the pilots who made the kills and the name of their home base is being kept confidential.
Felt kind of cautious. It's for starters, and make sure there weren't any others around that we didn't see. And I just run on down there wondering whether we're going to get shot back at or anything like that. And it's kind of nice when they didn't. Pressed on in there and started picking them up, and they started catching fire, and we got the hell out of there as fast as we could after we shot them. So
it's good to know that the missiles are going to come off the rails when you really need them, and the guys we have in maintenance just do an outstanding job on the jets, and it was a good feeling.
Once we get on the ground and taxi in, the line was full, big crowd, and they were pumped up and we were pumped up, and the best thing for us was the excitement we saw in all the guys' faces when we got on the deck, because our unit had done its job, and our job is to go out and protect other fighters and kill MiGs.
But it's not all action. Protecting Allied aircraft from the enemy's Air Force is a 24-hour-a-day job that sometimes gets boring. When the air campaign first started, Allied forces expected to go head-to-head with the Iraqi Air Force, but that hasn't happened.
The biggest problem we have with this tactic he has is not a war-driven problem. It's more a psychological problem, a problem of complacency, where we're literally up there wandering around the Iraqi skies just about anywhere we want to go, anytime we want to go there. We literally own the skies, and it's hard to keep the pilots cognizant of the fact that within a moment that could change. If he launches 4 or 5 MiGs up towards you. And it's happened to us a couple of times, and it snaps you back to reality that we're playing for keeps out here, and this is a very serious business.
Another thing pilots have to contend with when flying over Iraq is the deadly enemy ground defense called AAA, or anti-aircraft artillery. Learning to fly through and around AAA is a matter of life and death.
And what we found out is you've got to learn, and you've got to learn fast how to do that, because the first night of the war, we had guys that were out there at night and were shot at by surface-to-air missiles. And it's one of those training shortfalls that we need to work on after this war, is that you better know how to evade from a surface-to-air missile and how to evade AAA, because you never know where they're going to show up. Intelligence tries to tell you where they think the surface-to-air missiles are and where the AAA are, but of course the enemy's constantly moving those around, and they're very good at that. And being surprised by a supersonic surface-to-air missile could be lethal, of course.
As long as warbirds roar over Iraq, these American interceptor pilots will continue to protect Allied aircraft from air attack. Their job significantly contributes to the success of Allied air supremacy in the Persian Gulf. Staff Sergeant Jim Frost, DBS News, reporting from an air base in central Saudi Arabia.
The night of the 7th of November, Secretary Cheney and General Powell and the President had a news conference. We expected we may be going, but you know, the night that they had the news conference, I didn't think that they were going to announce specific units. They said they were going to send quite a few more folks to the Middle East. So my wife and I went ahead and went to bed. And the next morning, as we were driving to work, apparently they had announced it the night before. And when we were driving to work, 6 o'clock news came on, and and they announced that the 2nd Armored Division Forward would be deploying to Saudi Arabia. And it was quite a shock to find out like that. I never thought that I'd hear about it that way, and shocked my wife a little bit. Certainly did me also, but from that point forward, the pace picked up quite a bit. There's quite a bit of excitement on post when we finally did get in, but that wasn't the best way to find out about going to war anyway.
The road to the war was full of logistical potholes. Some 70,000 troops had to find their way to the desert, along with all the military hardware needed to fight a battle. Other than the actual combat, this logistics effort was the highlight of America's effort in Desert Storm. The operation was known as Sandy Cocktail, and the folks at AFN Shape and USAREUR Public Affairs covered it for us back in December.
When U.S. military equipment is shipped, a transportation terminal unit moves into the port, takes command, and controls ship loading. At Rotterdam, the Netherlands right now, the unit is the 1185th TTU from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The 1185th could be called Port Gypsies, considering their activities since the second wave started moving to Desert Shield. The 1185th's commander, Colonel Donald Detterling, listed their workplaces since August 11th.
Savannah, Georgia, Wilmington, North Carolina, Sunny Point, North Carolina, Newport News, Virginia, and finally here in Rotterdam.
This team moves with a purpose. This particular day, they were emptying a barge and loading 2 ships at once, the Cape Domingo and the Saudi Riyadh. Working on a European port presented only minor adjustment problems for these soldiers.
Just getting used to the time changes, the telephone systems, the different languages, different food, but no major problems. The ships are the same. We have some different rules with the labor that's here, but generally it isn't that much different. Most of my people come prepared to do the job, and they get right with it and complete the task at hand.
That's the kind of motivation the 1185th Transportation Terminal Unit takes to every port they work on. They're part of the overall team, making sure USAREUR vehicles and equipment get to the Gulf as quickly as possible. From Rotterdam, the Netherlands, Sergeant Austin Camacho, AFN News.
The job of loading thousands of pieces of military equipment on ships is more difficult than the job of a cashier, but the technology being used by the U.S. Army Europe in their deployment to Saudi Arabia is very similar.
The barcodes that we use here, that same idea, that same concept applies in grocery stores. When it's scanned by the scanner and we take those scanners and upload to the database, we now know what's on hand, what we have on port. And we know what kind of vehicle it is, we know where it is, and when it comes time to move it to the ship, you know what you have available. When it goes onto the ship, it's scanned again into where it is on the ship, so when you produce a manifest, you can determine your weight distribution.
LogMARS, or Logistics Application of Automated Marking and Reading Symbols, is not new and is a proven system. And the reservists using this system have just gone through a refresher crash course.
The unit went on annual training for 2 weeks, and we went to Savannah, Georgia, and we were there for about 2 weeks, and then we were activated from our annual training.
With these experienced operators in this computerized inventory and loading system, USAREUR soldiers headed to Saudi can rest assured their equipment will be processed out of Europe as fast as possible. In Rotterdam, the Netherlands, USAREUR's Joe Garvey reporting for AFN News.
It was sandy. It was colder than what I expected. They had told us it was going to be cool, and I had spent a lot of time in the Mojave Desert. And oh wow, I didn't expect the cold that they had. It was just freezing there at first when we got there in December. And well, you know, of course we bundled up to fight against the cold, and we still couldn't believe how cold it got at night and early in the mornings when we used to go out for early guard and late night guard missions.
By late December of 1990, thousands of European-based soldiers and airmen were already on the ground in Saudi Arabia, just standing by, waiting for the call to go up. This waiting and training and wondering about the future was at times the toughest part of being in the desert, and this was especially true around Christmas. But in typical GI fashion, some great morale boosting came out of this period, as we heard on tape from the Desert Shield Chamber Singers.
On the second day of Saudi, my LT gave to me 2 ice packs and an unloaded M16. On the third day of Saudi, my entropies, 2 ice packs, and an unloaded M16. On the 4th day of Saudi, my LT gave to me 4 ADUs, 3 entropies, 2 ice packs, and an unloaded M16. On the 5th day of Saudi, my LT gave to me 5 MREs, 4 BDUs, 3 entropies, 2 ice packs, and an unloaded M16. On the 6th day of Saudi, my LT gave to me 6 bottles of water, 5 MREs, 4 BDUs, 3 entropies, 2 ice packs, and an unloaded M16. On the 7th day of Saudi, my LT gave to me 7 magazines, 6 bottles of water, 5 MREs, 4 BDUs, 3 entropies, 2 ice packs, and an unloaded M16.